Alright, so in this class we're going to be rigging the arms. When we're setting up the arms, we want to make sure that we have two different modes for the arm to be controlled in. We'll be doing an IK arm setup and we'll do an FK arm setup. So an IK arm setup is basically the same as the way we rig the feet. So the reason why we would want an IK arm setup, for times when the character is leaning up against the wall or anytime the hand needs to be pinned, just like the feet stay pinned now when we move the body around. FK mode is basically just moving the joints individually like this. This is just controlling the arms with in FK mode. You'd want the arms in FK mode during acting scenes when the character is talking and acting like this, so that the arms maintain a nice arcing motion through all the movements. This is our bind arm joint that we originally set up and bound to the skin and painted all the weights on. So it's going to be the arm that controls all the deformations, and then we'll be able to switch between IK and FK when we're done, and we'll set up a switch as well. First, let's create our FK arm setup. So let's get into our proper layout. Just want to make sure your menu set is set to rigging. Let's get on the rigging shelf and let's change our layout. We'll go to two panes side by side. Spacebar right click for the perspective on this side, and let's go to panels and down to hypergraph. Alright, so we already have our left shoulder selected. The first thing we need to do is duplicate this left shoulder. So let's just hold down Control and press D on the keyboard. It creates a whole another joint chain here. If I rotate it up, you can see there's two now. So we only need the shoulder to the wrist. So I'm just going to hover over these: shoulder, elbow, forearm twist, wrist. And then here we start with the fingers. So everything from here down is fingers. We're just going to delete that. Alright, now we need to rename these so that they say FK. They have an FK prefix. FK left shoulder, FK left elbow, and so on. Okay, so we have all the joints, the new joints renamed, the FK joints. If I select the FK shoulder joint, I can see the rotate Y is at 0, so I can always zero that out. I just want to move it up for a minute. Alright, so now let's hide the bind joints. So just select the left bind shoulder, and you can hold Control down and hit H on your keyboard, and you'll see that it's grayed out now. That means it's hidden, and we don't see it here. So let's just put that FK joint right back down by zeroing out the translate Y. We want to make sure that it's in the exact same place as the bind joint to set it up. Alright, so let's start creating our control curves. So let's head on over to the curves shelf and we'll select a circle and let's bring it up. I'm just going to snap it to the shoulder joint. So I'm just going to unshow my polygons for a minute so I don't accidentally snap it to some mesh. Hold V down on the keyboard and let's just snap it right to the shoulder. And then I'm going to rotate that into place. I can see that it's rotating toward 90. It's going to be 90 degrees here, and there's rotate Z. So I'm just going to type in 90. Alright, now there's one little issue here we need to consider. When we rotate the shoulder down, I want to make sure that the rotation orientation is the same for the joint as it is for the control curve. So if I hit E on the keyboard for my rotation tool, I can see that Z is represented in blue, and that brings our arm up and down, and Y brings our arm forward and backward, and X twists the arm. Now if I select the control curve, it's going to be different. This is the same, the rotate Z is the same, but the X should be twisting the arm, and the Y should be bringing, the Y represented in green should be moving our arm backward and forward. So we need to change the orientation of the control curve. So to do that, we're going to go into component mode. You can press F8 on your keyboard, or you can click here. Make sure that only this question mark is selected. That'll allow us to rotate the orientation for the control curve. Now just going back into component mode for a minute, if we select the joint and hit W on the keyboard for our move tool, you can see that the Z is forward, the X is to the right, and the Y is up. So we need to make the control curve the same. And you can see that it's different. So let's go back into component mode, F8. Make sure you only get the question mark is there. And we're going to select this and just rotate it. Let's go into the front view for this, E on our keyboard, and we're just going to rotate that so the Y is up and the X is pointing to the right. So we can just hit F8 to get out of component mode. Let's go back to perspective view. And now you can see that the rotation for both the control curve and the joint are the same. We'll want to make sure that's the same situation for the elbow and wrist as well, and the forearm twist. Alright, so I'm going to go back to my curves. We'll create another one. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to snap it to the elbow joint by holding V down and moving it over. And then let's rotate it 90 degrees and make sure that the orientation is right. So the orientation for the elbow joint, Y bends the elbow in a natural way, X will be twisting it. So let's make sure it's the same thing here. And if you select the joint, you'll see the orientation is the same as the shoulder joint. So the X will be to the right, the Y is up, and the Z is pointing forward. So we'll select that, go into component mode, and we really just need to rotate this way. Let's do it in the front view. And that's good. Let's go back to perspective view. And F8 to get out of component mode, and just test to make sure orientations are the same. And they are. I'm going to do my wrist next. Really, I can duplicate this, so I'll hit Control D, and we'll just duplicate that and bring it over. Hold V down, we'll snap that to the wrist, and that kept our rotation orientation. Now we need to make a control for the forearm twist so that we can use it to twist the forearm. So let's just duplicate this one, Control D, and we'll slide that over. But I'm not going to keep that one as a circle, just because we won't see it turn very well, so I want to make it a different shape. Rotate this one 90 degrees. And let's go into component mode, control vertex, change the shape of this a little bit. So I'm just going to hide the joints for a minute, and I'll focus in on this. We'll hit F on the keyboard to focus in on it. So we can translate, rotate, and scale these vertices. Alright, so I think something like that is fine. Hit F8 again to get out of component mode. Let's turn on the joints again. And I'm actually going to turn polygons on for a minute because I want to place this in an appropriate spot. Really, I just want that to be just above the joint here. So something like that is fine. We want to snap the pivot point of this control to the joint. So we're going to hold V down, just turn polygons off, and make sure that it's snapped to the joint and not some part of the polygon mesh. Okay, so that's fine. Now our orientation got messed up, so we're going to adjust the orientation so it's the same as the forearm twist joint. With the rotate tool on, you should see that it'll rotate the same way. So that's good for now. Let's turn our polygons back on. Alright, so before I go any further, I'm going to rename these. So I'll name this one left shoulder control, left elbow control, and left wrist control, and left forearm twist. The next step is to delete history and freeze transformations, because you can see we have a bunch of values in here. So we're going to select each one, and we're going to go to Edit, Delete by Type, History, and then we'll go to Modify and Freeze Transformations. So I'm going to make sure that I freeze transformations on the Translate and Rotate. And you can see the values all go to 0 so that we can zero. That's very important that we do that so that we can zero these controls out again later on as we're animating. Edit, Delete by Type, History, Modify, Freeze Transformations. And we'll do the same thing for the forearm and the wrist. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to parent constraint each control to its respective joint. We always want to select the control first, then the joint second. Let's go to Constrain, Parent Constraint. Let's make sure we want to have the translates and rotates. We'll just go to Add. So now when we select the control, it takes the whole arm with it. And we'll do the same thing with the elbow. Control first, then elbow, and we'll go parent constraint. And the same with the forearm, control and forearm joint, and wrist control and wrist joint. Select our shoulder joint, and we can go in the hypergraph and hit F, and it'll focus right in on the control curves node. So what we want to do now is just parent these underneath each other. Because you can see if I rotate the shoulder joint now, nothing happens. It's just rotating the actual joint. Same with the wrist and all the other joints. It's not really doing anything. So we need to parent these together. In the hypergraph, we can middle mouse button and slide it over to the shoulder and release. And then we'll do the forearm under the elbow and the wrist under the forearm. So they're basically in order. Now if we select the shoulder control, it all moves together. And it's all working nice. So we'll just Control Z to put it all back. Alright, so that's the FK arm. We'll just move this FK arm up with the control curve. We just want it out of the way for now so we can set up our IK arm. So now we're going to turn our bind arm chain back on again. So let's just find it here. It's right here. You can see here it says visibility off. 0 is off, 1 is on. So if you set it to 1 and hit enter, it'll come back on, or you can hold shift down and press H on your keyboard. So we're going to duplicate this again. So we'll Control D and find the new duplicate. So this is our new duplicate here. This is going to be the IK arm setup. You can see the rotate Y value is at 0, so if you move it down temporarily, you can always just put it back to 0 in a few minutes. we have the shoulder, the elbow, the forearm, and the wrist. So we're going to delete everything from here down. So that's all the finger joints. So if we select them, we can see them there in the view panel, and we'll hit delete on the keyboard. So by and left shoulder, we're going to name that IK. We're going to give all these joints an IK prefix and enter that. We'll go through and just name them all. Alright, now let's just hide the bind joint again. We don't need it on anymore. Control H, and let's put this back up to where it belongs. Zero out the IK shoulder. Alright, so now we're going to set up the IK arm. So let's go back to our rigging shelf and let's click on Create IK Handle tool, and you'll see it appear in your toolbar. So we'll double click on it to get the tools up, and we're going to use the rotate plane solver so we can get a twist on it. So what we want to do is start at the shoulder, just like we did with the legs. We'll start at the shoulder, but we're not going to go right to the wrist because it'll actually bend the forearm joint. So we're gonna go to the forearm joint and then move the pivot point over to the wrist. So we'll click on the shoulder first, then we're going to click on the forearm joint. Now before we go any further, I just want to click off here for a minute. You can see our IK handle right here. You see how the plane is pointing forward? It's going to actually make our elbow bend the wrong way. So I don't want to have that happen. So before we go any further, I'm just going to Control Z to undo my IK handle. If you rigged your character with a slight bend in the wrist, that might make a difference. But to fix this situation, we're going to just give the elbow a slight bend. I'm going to right click on it and then select Set Preferred Angle. That's going to cause our elbow to bend in the right direction when we apply our IK handle. And now I'm just going to set this elbow back to 0. IK handle tool again, and we'll just go from the shoulder to the forearm twist again. And now you can see it's pointing back in the right direction. And if I try to bend the elbow now, it bends backward in the right direction. Alright, so the next thing we need to do is change the pivot point of the effector. So whenever we create an IK handle, it creates one of these little effectors. And you'll find it there. I'm just going to close this up. You'll find the effector attached by this red line. It'll be attached to the shoulder joint. But what we want to do is change the pivot point of this effector, not the IK handle, but the actual effector. So to do that, we'll press D on the keyboard, and now we can move the pivot point, but we'll hold V so that we can snap it to the wrist joint. So again, I'm going to unshow our polygons for a minute just to make sure that it's snapping to the joint and not the mesh. And then we'll turn our polygons back on. Alright, now tap D on the keyboard to lock it into place. And now you can see our IK handle is at the wrist and not the forearm twist. Not only will it prevent the forearm twist from bending when we bend the arm, but it also frees up the forearm joint so that we can set up the forearm twist controls in a few minutes. So now if we bend the arm, it bends in the proper way. Alright, so now we're going to create a control curve. It's very similar to the ones we created for the FK arm so that we can move it around. So let's go to curves again. We'll just create a circle. Now I'm just going to place this one above the hand right here, and we'll just scale it, give it some shape. But I think this is fine. You can shape it however you like. Alright, so now we're going to move the pivot point of this hand control to the wrist joint. It's good to turn off your polygons first. And let's tap D on the keyboard, and we'll hold V down. And just snap the pivot point right to the wrist joint. And we'll tap D again to lock that into place. Clear the history. Edit, delete by type, history, and we're going to freeze the transformations by going to modify and freeze transformations. Now let's just turn our polygons back on. So now I have to apply a couple of constraints to get this control to move the arm properly. So we're going to point constraint the control curve of the hand to the IK handle. So select the control curve first, then the IK handle, and we're going to go to constraint and point constraint. And then we're going to orient constraint the hand control to the wrist joint. So hand control first, shift select the wrist joint, constrain, and we're going to choose orient. Now if we move the hand control, it moves the arm in an expected and natural way, and we can also rotate it now too. Just set all these back to 0. Let's just move this down, and let's turn our bind joints back on. You can see it here, it's grayed out. So Shift H. Alright, so we have our FK arm set up and we have our IK arm set up. So now we're going to orient constraint each one of these joints from the 2 new arm setups we created to the bind joints. So first we want to select the IK shoulder joint, then select the FK shoulder joint, and then shift select the bind joint last. And we're going to go to constrain, And we're going to choose orient, but let's look at the option box. Make sure that the maintain offset is not checked, and we'll just click add. And you can see that immediately it moved a little bit. Because the bind shoulder is now constrained to both the FK and IK, it's just sort of averaging between the two. So we're going to do the same thing with the elbow. Select the IK elbow first, then the FK elbow, and then the bind elbow. And we'll go to constrain and orient. The IK forearm twist, the FK forearm twist, and the bind forearm twist. Constrain and orient. And then finally the wrist, IK, FK, and bind. And we'll choose orient. So now you can see the IK controls move the bind arm, and the FK controls also move the bind arm. We only want to have one of these arm chains controlling the bind arm at a time. So if I go to the bind shoulder, you can see now we have an IK left shoulder constrained channel and an FK left shoulder constrained channel. And they're both set to 1, which means the constraints for both are on. So 1 is on and 0 is off. Let's just say if I set the IK constraint to off for that shoulder. So IK is off, so it's popping up closer to the FK. If I do the same thing with all the joints and just zero the IK out, it's now favoring the FK. Now our arm is basically in FK mode. Now if I do the same thing and switch these all back to 1, and I'll change all the FKs to 0, we're going to turn on the IK arm. But we have to do it for each joint. And now the IK arm is controlling the bind arm, because all the constraints for the FK are turned off. I'm going to turn all the IK constraints off because I want to get the arm straight for the next step. So now we need to create a control for the animators to select so that they can switch it between IK and FK easily. So I'm actually going to we'll go to create under text. I'll go to the option box. So I'm going to create a text control called IK FK, and we'll hit create. I'm going to put it right over top of the hand, and that's going to be connected to the bind joint. And I'm just going to scale that down a little, make sure it's over the hand. Alright, so you'll notice that this new control curve that we selected they're all separate pieces. We want to consolidate that into one selectable object. So if we look in the outliner window, let's go to Windows Outliner, hit Shift, hold Shift down to uncollapse all of that. You'll notice that each curve is grouped by a letter, and you can see this in the graph editor too. So we'll just minimize this. So let's go and unparent all of our curves. We can just shift select them and middle mouse button drag them off the group. So with all of our curves still selected, we're going to freeze the transformations by going to modify and freeze transformations. And just select each one to make sure that they're all zeroed out. Next, let's go to options. Under display, select shape nodes. Alright, so we're going to select all these shape nodes, but make sure you select curve 1 last. So your hypergraph should look something like this. And then we're going to type in a simple mel command, parent-r-s, and we'll enter that. And now we can click on any one of the letters and it selects the entire thing. So let's just delete all of this. These are the original nodes, and we'll just delete these. And let's center the pivot on this. We'll go to modify and center pivot. We'll rename this to left IK FK switch. Alright, so now I want to make sure that when I move the arm around, this IK FK control is going to come with the hand. So we're going to select the bind wrist joint, and we'll shift select the IK FK control, and let's go to constrain, and we'll just parent that. So make sure that translates and rotates are all on, and we'll add that. So now when we move the arm, the IK FK control comes along for the ride. And it's a good idea to test it. Just turn the IK back on again by just switching the 1s and 0s here on the bind joints, and just make sure that it translates and rotates and it works fine. So we can just control Z to get out of that. Alright, so because we don't want to continuously be going through and changing these values, I'm going to consolidate these controls or these attributes into a single attribute that's going to be attached to this IK FK control. So the first thing we need to do is create a new attribute for this control curve. We'll go to modify and add attribute. Alright, I'm going to make 2 attributes. Create one attribute to control the IK constraint values and another attribute to control the FK constraint values. So the first one I'll name FK, and I'll give it a minimum value of 0 and a maximum value of 1. So we're just going to be able to turn it on and off. And I'll hit add. And then the next one we'll do is just going to be called IK with a minimum value of 0 and a maximum value of 1. And we'll hit OK. So now you can see we have our two new attributes here. And now we can connect these two new IK and FK attributes to the constraint attributes that we have on the bind joints. We're going to use the connection editor to connect these attributes together. So let's go to Windows, and under General Editors, we'll go to Connection Editor. Let's select the IK/FK control, and I'm going to load that on the left. So you just click on Reload Left. Alright, so then you want to go down to, you might have it at the top, but mine's going to be down at the bottom. You can see my FK attributes here. And the next thing we want to do is select your bind shoulder joint. We're just going to open up the outliner here, and you can just hit F on the keyboard to focus in on it. You can expand the whole bind shoulder by hitting the plus sign. And if you go near the bottom here, you'll find these constraints. And it has a different symbol on the left, but you'll have bind left wrist, orient constraint, forearm twist, and elbow and shoulder. So you'll have a constraint for each of those. So we'll just start with the wrist and select it, and we'll go reload right. Just scroll down till you find an attribute that looks something like this. It should say IK left wrist WO or IK left wrist W1. You'll see it'll say IK and it should be named with the wrist if you've named everything properly. Just simply connect the FK to the FK attribute and the IK to the IK attribute. And then we'll go down to the forearm twist, reload right again, and just repeat the same process. FK to the FK and IK to the IK. Again, I'll reload the left elbow, IK to the IK, and FK to the FK. And then the shoulder. Reload, FK to FK, and IK to IK. So that's all of them. We can close that up now. Now if we select our IK FK control, if I switch FK to 1, it's completely being controlled by the FK controls. And if I select that again and switch those, we'll turn FK off by changing it to 0. And we'll turn IK on by changing that to 1, and now it's completely being controlled by the IK controls. Instead of having two different controls that we have to set one to 0 and the other one to 1, let's consolidate these into one control. Let's just set them both to 0. I'm going to go to Modify and Edit Attribute, and I'm going to change the IK name. I'm just going to name it IK/FK Switch. So we're going to write a really simple expression just to consolidate these two attributes into one attribute. So to do that, we'll go to Windows, Animation Editors, and we'll choose Expression Editor. And we're just going to write a very simple expression. So I'm just going to copy the name of our IK/FK switch. And we're going to end it with a dot, and we're going to go FK. This is the name of the attribute. And we're going to say equals 1. And then we're just going to copy that name to the other side. This is the name of our control, equals 1, dash the name of our control again, dot, we're going to type in IK. You always want to end each line with a semicolon. Alright, so we have the name of the object, followed by a dot, followed by the attribute name, and then the name of the object again, followed by a dot, and then we have this attribute name because I renamed this IK to IK/FK switch. We'll hit create. Okay, and that worked. If it doesn't work, you'll get a red text message at the bottom. So we'll just close this up, and we'll close that up. And now, if we go to our IK/FK switch and middle mouse button drag, it'll switch from IK to FK. So what we can do now is we don't need to see this attribute anymore. So we'll just right click and we'll go hide selection. And really, for this control, we don't need any of these. We're going to clean up our whole rig later, but you can go right click and hide. Let's drag our IK/FK switch to 1 so that we're in IK mode. I'm just going to zero out the controls for the arm just so it's in its original position, its bind position. And we're going to create a pull vector to control the direction of the elbow when we're in IK mode. First I need to create a control curve for that, so we're going to go to Create, and let's go to Text. I like to create an E for this. E stands for elbow. Let's create, and we'll bring it up. Just going to scale that up a little bit. Let's center the pivot, so we'll go to Modify Center Pivot, and let's snap it to the elbow joint. So we'll hold V down on the keyboard and let's snap it right to the elbow. Let's turn our polygons off for 1 second. Just want to make sure I snap that right to the joint. and polygons back on, and we'll just drag that back. You don't want it too close and you don't want it way out there in space. If you bend the elbow all the way, you still want it to be behind the elbow. Alright, so we want to make sure we go to edit, and we want to do the same thing we've done before with the other controls. Delete by type, and we'll choose history. And then we'll go to modify and freeze transformations. So we'll select our elbow control first and shift select our IK handle second, and we're going to go to constrain and choose pull vector. So now when the arm is in IK mode, we'll say for example we have the arm posed in whatever position, we can use this control to point the elbow in any direction we need to. So we'll just set those all back to 0. So now I'll just select the FK shoulder control curve and we'll just 0 that back out. And it looks like the elbow's bent there, we'll 0 that out. So that's pretty much it for the arm setup. We just need to repeat the same process on the other side for the right arm. Alright, so now we're going to start rigging the fingers. So to rig the fingers, we're going to use set driven keys. So you want to have your menu set on animation. And let's go to create, and we'll go to text, option box. And I already typed it in here earlier. I'm using a capital H for hand. So I'll hit create. Alright, so now I'm going to go to modify and we'll center the pivot. Delete any history. There isn't any history on it, but I just like to do this anyways. And then we'll go to modify and we'll freeze the transformations. We're going to look in the hypergraph now for a minute. Alright, so I know the IKFK control follows the hand no matter what mode it's in. Alright, so there it is, and then underneath it is a constraint. That's the parent constraint that we applied to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this H control. I'm just going to unlink it from these other nodes. So middle mouse button, click on it and drag away in space here, and then just delete these other nodes. So we just have our curve. Okay, we have center pivot on that again. Center pivot, and what I want to do is sandwich it in between this IK control curve and the parent constraint. So I'm just going to middle mouse button over my curve and drag it over the IKFK control curve node, and then I'm going to grab the parent constraint, attach it to this H curve. So now we have this new curve sandwiched in between our IKFK control and the parent constraint. And I'll just rename this left hand control. Alright, so let's just test that really quick. So our hand control is now part of the rig. Just to 0 those back out. So for the fingers, usually there's quite a lot of attributes that are added on in a professional rig. We'll have things like finger curls, which will curl the whole finger like this. And then we can set up individual controls that curls each joint individually. Then we'll set up some spreads, so we can spread the fingers. And we'll also set up some roll controls, so we can roll the thumb in. And we'll do the same thing with the pinky. We want to be able to get the thumb and the pinky to touch each other, so that way we can cup the hand. So let's select the hand control, and let's add our attributes. Go to modify, add attribute. So we're going to be adding a whole bunch here. So the first one we'll add is go index finger curl. And we'll set all of these the same way. We'll go with a minimum of -10 and a maximum of 10, and the default will be 0. So the default pose will be as the hand is now. And we'll hit add, and then you can see it pop up here in our channel box under the left hand control. So now we're going to do middle finger curl, ring finger curl, and pinky finger curl. Alright, so we have all of our curls in. Now I'm going to create an attribute that's just the title. So I'll click on displayable, call this index curls, and you can see that it's grayed out. So it's not something that you actually animate on. It's just a title, so we can separate these groups. This is a group, these are our curls, and then we're going to do individual curls for each joint. Make sure it's on keyable again, and we'll call the next one, we'll call it index 1, so it'll be joint 1. We'll go joint 1, joint 2, joint 3. So just a quick heads up, in the process of creating this video class, as I went through and added the attributes for the index, middle, ring, pinky, I did forget to add a thumb attribute underneath this, and you can see on the other one, on our other hand control, we have index, middle, ring, pinky, and then we have a thumb attribute here. Also too, we have our index curls, We have our middle curls, ring finger curls, and pinky curls, and then we have our thumb curls. So this is the correct way to do it. I just basically forgot to add the thumb controls on this hand. But the process is still the same. You just want to make sure that you don't forget to add these as you're creating them, because you can't reorder them later. Right, so we'll call it index 1. We're going to keep on doing the same thing where minus 10 is the minimum and the maximum is 10. Make sure it's unkeyable, and we'll add that. So we have our individual index bend attributes in. You want to have a lot of dexterity with the hands, so this is going to be great for the animators. So let's do another displayable attribute just to separate them. You can see how we have a separation here now under index curls. We have our 3 joints, and we'll do the same thing for the middle finger, ring finger, and pinky finger. Alright, so I have all of our finger curls where the finger will curl all together. And then we have our individual index curls, middle curls, ring curls, and pinky curls. We want to be able to get the fingers to spread out. To add a little more control, it's nice to have individual spreads. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Alright, so I'm going to create another title here called spreads. We'll call that finger spreads. Let's make it displayable because it's just going to be a title or a separator, and I'll add that with no values. So we'll do a spread for each finger. So make sure it's unkeyable again, and we'll go index spread, minus 10 for the minimum and 10 for the maximum, and we'll add. So now you can see under spreads here we have index spread. Now we're going to do one for each one of the fingers in order. Have all of our spreads in. And the last thing I want to do is add a thumb roll and a pinky roll. So I'm going to do another displayable attribute, and I'm just going to call this rolls. And make sure we're on displayable with no values, and we'll add that. So now we have a separator here called rolls. And then the next one's going to be, I'm just going to do a thumb roll and a pinky roll. Make sure that one is keyable. Close up the add attribute window, we don't need that anymore. Alright, so let's open up our set driver key window again. So we want the driver to be this hand control. So we're going to select that and click on load driver. And you can see we have all of our attributes here that we created. So the first one is going to be the index finger. We want to click on that to highlight it, and we'll click on the joint. And you can see that the rotations for the joint are set to 0. So we'll click on the joint and we'll click on load driven. And if we hit E on the keyboard, you can see that it's going to be the rotate Z. So we'll select the rotate Z, and as soon as you do that, you can see that your key button becomes ungrayed, and we can key that. So we'll hit key. So now we've keyed the default position. Now let's do the minus 10 and the 10. So we'll select our hand control again. We'll go to finger curl, because this is the one we're doing now. And I'm just going to set it to minus 10. And now we'll go back to the finger, and we'll actually rotate it. So I want my minus values to be up when the finger is rotated upward. And I'm going to make a note of how far I'm rotating that up. So let's go to 70. So as soon as we have that to 70, we can key it again. So now if you go to your hand control and you select the index finger curl attribute and your middle mouse button virtual slide, you can see we go from 0 to minus 10. Okay, so now I'll set this to 10. And let's rotate the finger down. And I think I'm going to do minus 70 on this one, and we'll key that. So now if we select the hand control again, we have the first knuckle done. So this is our minus 10 position and our 10 position. Alright, so I'm just going to set the index finger curl back to 0. So I'm going to do the next knuckle now. So we're going to select joint number 2 on the index finger, and we're going to go load driven. We're still doing the index finger curl, so we're just going to select rotate Z, and it's already on 0, so we'll hit key to key its default position, and we'll go to the hand control. Let's scrub till we get it to minus 10, and then now we can select the joint and bend it back a little bit. Let's set it to 30, and we can hit key. Then we'll select the hand control again, we'll go to 10, and now we'll rotate this joint into place. So I usually like to go a little further than what you might consider a natural movement, just so that we can get as much dexterity out of the hand as possible. So this one looks like we can go, let's go minus 100, and I'll make a note of that, and we'll key it. So now when we select the hand control, we should have both joints rotating. Alright, so let's just set this back to 0 again, and we'll do the last joint. We'll select that joint number 3, and we'll load driven. Select the rotate Z, and we'll key it. Go back to our hand control. Let's go to the minus 10 value, select the joint, and let's rotate that back. So I'll go back to 30, and we'll make a note of that, and then key it. Drag all the way to 10, and now we'll rotate this joint, and we'll key that. So now I have our index finger curl done. So we'll just leave that on 0, and we're going to repeat the same process for the rest of the fingers. Alright, so I've gone through and done the first 3 finger curls. We have our index curl, our middle finger curl, and we have the ring finger curl finished. Now there's just a couple of things I want to go through just to show you a couple of tips. It's a common mistake to forget to change the driver or to change the attribute under the driver section. So you want to make sure that you change that so that you're affecting the attribute. Now that we have all these done, I'm just going to go over all the fingers, and we're just going to drag it all the way to the up position so that we have them all at -10. It's just nice to do that so you can see all the other fingers that you've done to make sure that the one you're doing now lines up. So if you took note as to how far you rotated this, if you remember that these were at -70, I wrote them in a notepad earlier, but you can see if I just select any one of these joints, you can see that they're all at 70 here. So if you forget to write it down, you can just select the joint next to it to see what the number is once you have it rotated up like this. So I can see that it's 70, so I'll select the pinky joint, type in 70, and now I can just hit key. I'll go back to my hand control, select all the attributes for the pinky curls. Let's just curl all the fingers in. If you can't remember how far you rotated the previous fingers, again, you can just select that knuckle and it's -70. So we'll do the same thing for each knuckle. We'll just type in -70 and we'll key that. And we just need to do that last knuckle of the pinky. You can see it's not bending. Let's just set all these back to 0 again so we can keep the third knuckle of the pinky at its default position. Make sure you select that last knuckle and hit load driven, and then select the rotate Z and key it. So all the way up. I just remember now because I've done it a bunch of times, it's 30, and we'll key it. Fold them all the way in, and we'll key that. And now we're done with all the finger curls. Okay, now you can see if I drag over all these, you'll notice that the index finger is moving at a different rate than the other fingers. So to fix that, it's really easy. You just select the knuckle. Let's have a quick look in the graph editor. We'll go to Windows, Animation Editors, under Graph Editor. You can see the animation curve for this knuckle. So if I select the other knuckles, you can see the animation curve for it. And you can see that it's just a nice arced curve. If I select this knuckle for the middle finger joint 1, you can see that there's a flat tangent here. So all you want to do is select that and hit spline. Just click on this icon for spline and make sure that the other knuckles are all spline, just so that they move at the same rate. And you could do all of them at the same time. If you just hold shift down and select all the knuckles, then you can just drag a box over that middle key and click on spline, and now we're all set. They're going to move at the same rate now. So if we select the hand control and we test it, let's drag over all the attributes for the finger curls, and now they all move together perfectly. Now we're going to do the individual knuckle bends. It's going to come in really handy for extra dexterity in our character's hand. Take a look at our individual knuckle controls for the index finger now. We have knuckle 1, knuckle 2, and we have knuckle 3. So now we can bend these fingers in any way, pretty much any way we want, which comes in really handy. So we'll just set those back to 0, and we'll repeat the same process for the middle finger, the ring finger, and the pinky finger. Alright, so I've gone through and done all the individual knuckle curls for the index, middle, ring, and pinky finger. Now we have some really detailed dexterity in the hand, and we can get some really cool finger poses like this. Now we have everything back to 0. Now we're going to do the finger spreads. So if you actually look at your hand and you close your fingers and spread your fingers apart, you can see that when you spread your fingers apart, the middle finger it pretty much stays still, and all the fingers move away from the middle finger. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to do the same thing. We're not really going to move the middle finger very much. We might move it a little bit. You can see that your middle finger spreads toward the pinky just a little bit. So we're going to do that here too. So let's do the finger spreads. We'll start with the index. In your set driving key window under the driver area, you want to go to index spread and make sure you have that selected first, just like we did with everything else. So for these, we're only going to be affecting the first knuckles of all the fingers. This will be relatively quick. We'll go with a minus value for having the fingers go in together and a positive value to have the fingers spread outward. And this time we're not going to go with rotate Z. If you select the knuckle and hit your rotate tool, the spread is rotate Y. So we're going to go down to the rotate Y and activate that, and we're just going to hit key. Alright, so we have all of our spreads done. So now if we highlight all the attributes for our finger spreads, See that they all spread together, but you wouldn't normally do that. If you were going to animate this and pose the fingers, you probably want to pose them something like that. But at least we have individual controls for each finger spread. Alright, so the last thing we're going to do is the thumb roll and the pinky roll. Sometimes you have to use a little bit of translation to get these rolls to work properly. Let's do the thumb roll first. So make sure we change our driver to the thumb roll. And I think I'm going to roll the thumb from the first join here. If you flip your hand over palm up and you touch your pinky to your thumb, basically we want to get that kind of movement happening with the hand. So you just want to get the thumb to roll in toward the middle of the palm and the pinky to roll in toward the middle of the palm so that they touch. If you actually try and do it with your own hand, you can see that your pinky and thumb, you bend them, but we already have all the individual knuckle bends. So really what we need to do is just rotate this first joint. It rolls in toward the middle of the hand in a way that is close without the finger bending. Let's load the driven for the thumb. And I'm just going to select all the translates and rotates. I might rotate and translate it a little bit just to get it in the right position. It's a little clunky toward the middle, but we're going to straighten that out with the graph editor. Alright, so we'll just put that back at 0 and we'll do the pinky now. We're going to do something very similar with the pinky. Let's activate the pinky roll attribute and let's select the first knuckle of the pinky and we'll hit load driven. And we're just going to select all the translates and rotates and we'll key it. Okay, so now that we have those all done, now we want to go to the graph editor and just straighten out those curves. So I'll open up my graph editor again. Let's just select these joints. We can shift select all of them. Some of them we already splined, but some of them we didn't. So let's just select all of them. Drag a box over these middle keys and we'll select spline. You can do each one individually too, just to be sure that you've gotten all of them. Alright, so now when we roll the thumb and the pinky, it rolls a lot smoother. All the other movements will move a lot smoother as well. So that's pretty much it for rigging the hand. You can add any other kinds of movements you would like with the hand, but these are the standard attributes that you would rig a character's fingers with. Alright, so I'm just going to repeat the process with the other hand, setting it up the exact same way. In the next class we're going to complete the body rig by setting up the control curves for the hips, pelvis, and spine controls.